Bibles with you this morning will be, again, jumping off of 2 Corinthians chapter 9. And as we've been finishing up this series, we've looked at everything, and now we're going to be looking at the concept of giving. And let me just say, as we talked about spending, we kind of shortened it. We didn't go into a ton of details. We just gave some basic principles. If you would like things like, I have access to different things where if you want help with budgeting and stuff like that, like spreadsheets to work through and all that type of stuff. If you want some good recommended reading, like say if you want to get out of debt or whatever those things, just ask me. I'm happy to give that to you, but I thought I'm not going to just go into heaps of detail throughout this time. We'll just keep it short, and so that way we'll get the basic principles. All right, so that's what we did. Now we're in giving, and we talked about, did we get to the first point where, and when you look at giving, it starts with gratitude? Did we get that far? All right, so as you look at that and you think of giving, you want to, gratitude, really, it's a form of worship. It's being grateful to the one who gave it to us. And focusing on our stuff or the lack thereof it's also a form of worship, right? If I'm focusing on things, what am I worshiping? The thing I'm focused on. All right, so look at 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 8. It says, "And God is able to make all grace abound towards you, that ye, always having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work." And so as we look at this, we can ask ourselves the question, where has God blessed you abundantly? It's not all the time as a church we say our excess is to help someone else's need. So when we look at things and we looked at our missions account and we saw we had an excess in the missions account, what did we immediately start looking for? Needs that our missionaries have, that we could take that and give that to them. And that's what we were able to do last Sunday, and it was a great blessing. And just about every one of our missionaries, just so you know, if I stood here and read the thank you texts we got from every single missionary, they were all extremely grateful. It was very helpful. A lot of different things that those funds are going to go to. And so it's exciting to be able to be a part of that. But when we have an excess, someone else has a need, and we can do that. And sometimes they have a need and they don't even tell you, and you give them the funds, and it's helpful. So look at that way in life as well. And we should be thankful for our jobs and for God's provision, for all those types of things. Now, the second thing that we see about giving is not only does it start with gratitude, but let's be honest, and let's not say anything else, let's not try to paint it any other way. Giving is a major act of trust, is it not? It really is. If I'm going to give to God and I'm going to say give a tithe of 10%, that is a real declaration of I trust God. I trust God's word. Because let's be honest, if you're talking financially and you're looking at logic and common sense, if you have a hard time meeting your bills on 100% of your income, does it make sense to then give away 10% of your income if 100% of your income is already struggling meeting the bills? It doesn't. But what does it take? It says, you know what, God, I've looked at your word. Your word teaches a principle. It doesn't make sense, but I'm going to trust you enough to give it a go. I'm going to trust you enough to give. And then you know what you find? It's really weird that what you have left seems to go further than it would have gone if you had it all. And you're like, that doesn't make any logical sense. That, especially someone who's studied accounting and finance, it just does not compute. That is not right. I'm the type of person that I like to figure things out. Like, I like to figure out how it works. And I've tried all my life. I wonder how that works. You know what I can tell you? I have no idea. That's all I can tell you. I just know it does. You say, why? Because it's a major act of really trusting God. God has blessed us, each of us, abundantly and supplied our needs. So we shouldn't be an ungrateful recipient. If we're going to overflow with generosity, we have to start by giving thanks, and then we have to give God our trust. And it's saying, God, I trust you more than the amount of money in my bank account. What it says, I'm going to put you first and trust you for all my needs, even if that's scary. But after all, doesn't the Bible tell us that in all things he should have preeminence? He should have first place. Correct? In all things. And so it's an act of doing that. It's one of the most common areas where we tend to hold back on God. And that's not just money. That's maybe our time, maybe using our talents. It's one of the most common areas that's very easy in our Christian life and our walk with God to hold back on God. And it's very easy to justify it. Right? Well, after all, God says if you don't provide for your own, you're worse than an infidel. And I don't want to be worse than an infidel. Right? It's easy to justify it. Right? So, think of it that way. Look at Malachi chapter 3 and verse 10. Should be a familiar verse to some. In the Old Testament, Malachi 3 verse 10, it says, bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house, and prove me now, herewith saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. I mean, think about that. God basically says, bring the tithes into the storehouse, prove me. Test me. Now, I don't know about you, but I've seen God keep every promise he's ever made. So if God's saying, try this out and test me, see if I won't do this, I think you have a pretty good track record. Sometimes you get, on social media, you get friends from the weirdest places. And I get the weirdest things. And recently, I just got a request to be a friend, and I got a message from this guy, and he's like, now, I know you don't know me, but my job is I help pastors invest in the stock market. And if you follow my foolproof plan, you'll be able to invest all your time in the ministry without having to worry about money. And I thought, oh, so what you're saying is trust me. Give me money and trust me. And he says, and you don't have to do a thing. I'll handle it all for you. So at that point, I thought, I'm going to have some fun. And so I messaged him back, and I said, thank you so much for your concern for me and my financial situation. I appreciate that, and I appreciate sometimes your advice. I said, I just have one word of advice for you, one word of question for you. And he immediately pops back and says, what's that? And I said to him, in order to invest in the stock market, don't you actually have to have the money to invest? And he says, well, yes, you do. And I said, how much is the minimum that I need to come up with to invest in your scheme? $10,000. And I said, it strikes me as odd that you're saying pastors struggle with income, and you're going to help us with our income, but in order to do that, you're telling me I have to have $10,000 lying around to give you. And he's like, yes. And I said, so how do you reckon I get $10,000? He said, from your savings account. I said, you're a comedian now. And he said, I don't find that funny. And I said, well, I do. Like, have you looked at my banking account? Like, I mean, there's enough there. It pays the bills and all that type of stuff. But to have $10,000 that you have no purpose or need for doesn't happen. And then he says this, well, take out a loan. I'm like, so now you're saying you want to help me with my income by putting me in debt for $10,000 to give some random stranger on the internet $10,000. He said, yes, I promise you a return. I said, but will the return interest I get be greater than the interest I pay? Well, I don't know about that. Well, if it's not, then it's not making me any money. You're losing me money. And he's like, well, and I said, thank you for your time. You've answered enough of my questions. I'm not investing in this. I'm not looking in that. Thank you for that. He goes, well, you don't know what you're missing. I said, yes, I do. I'm missing losing $10,000 and being in debt for it. That's what I'm missing. All right? And here's the thing. I have a harder time trusting him. But, it should be easier to trust God, right? Because he's proven himself to us. And so giving is a major act of trust. And tithing teaches us to prioritize our life around God, the one who really wants worship. All right? So the next thing that happens when you let gratitude fill up your life is you begin to open your heart to being generous in all areas of your life. And you begin to say, you know what? I'll take God up on this offer. I'll try him out. And you begin to put God first in all areas of your life. And then lastly, you need to plan your generosity. Without a good plan, good intentions fall flat. Right? In 2 Corinthians chapter 9 that we looked at last week, Paul's writing to the Corinthians about the Macedonians, wanting the Corinthians to be inspired and ready to give. The Corinthians had already said they were going to give, and it was in part their commitment to give that inspired the Macedonians to give generously. So Paul came through, and the Corinthians said, oh, yeah, we're going to give an offering, and we're going to give this much. And Paul went, that's awesome. And Paul went on his way, and he told the message, you'll never believe this. We were in Corinth, and the Corinthian believers there said they were going to give this much. And the Macedonians were like, you know what? If they can give, we can give too. And that inspired them to give. But guess what happened? A year went by, and they inspired them to give, but they hadn't given. They just promised. It's kind of like, I try to be a realist, but not a pessimist, if that makes sense. And I was talking to Andy the other day, and he's like, yeah, this is exciting. I'm like, what's exciting? He goes, we've been in 5 churches in a row, and all 5 churches voted to take us on for support while we're in the meeting. I said, that's wonderful. And he goes, yeah, so that puts us up to this percent. I said, that's wonderful, but don't count it till you see it. He said, what do you mean? I said, there's one particular church, I could tell you the name, I could tell you the location. I've been in it 3 times, and 3 times they voted to take us home for support, and 3 times we've never seen a cent. I said, so when you get your monthly statement, and the church's name is there, and the money's there, count that. Right? And he's like, really? I'm like, yes. Plan it. Plan your generosity. Like a lot of times it happens. And as you look at that, when we make a plan, we can give generously with joy. When we do not plan, that is when our commitments feel like a weight. And that's why sometimes when we have different things, like, okay, the Angel Tree Project, months in advance, we say, hey, you know what? It's time to sign up for Angel Tree. If you would like to sign up to give a gift for Angel Tree, do it now. You say, what are you trying to do? I'm trying to say, let's plan our generosity as a church. So that way, it's not like in 2 weeks, and now you've got to come up with $25 at Christmas time, but you can start planning like months in advance to be involved. And last year, our church, we had 5 kids that we signed up for. This year, I just kept getting text. By the time it was over, there was 20 kids signed up for. So we can, it creates different problems, but it's good. You know, we'll increase our generosity that time of year fourfold. How? Plan it, right? Our missions giving, what do? We plan the generosity. We say, you know what, we're going to give this to missions. That's why next month we're going to have a missions emphasis month. And we're going to, be teaching. We're going to give out faith promise cards. We're going to say, hey, pray about it and try to plan what you're going to give this year to missions. And based on that plan, we can then make plans about what we can do for missions. So plan your generosity. Make a decision right now. If you're not tithing, begin somewhere. You say, but what about 10%? Okay, here, let me just challenge you. If you're not tithing, begin somewhere. Give something. Just give something and see what God does. And then when you see what God does with that, try a little bit more. Try a little bit more. By the way, people say, well, and sometimes it's funny when people tithe. I sometimes laugh. Like I had someone ask me about tithing, and I'm like, yep. And they're like, so if I make $1,214 and cents, that means 98 cents. That means I give $121.49. I'm like, technically, yes. If you want to go to the penny and you want to be like really, really precise, and I'm like, or you could do something like this. Be crazy. Just round up to the nearest dollar. Make it easy. But that would be giving more than 10%. Yeah. By the way, have you noticed in the Bible it talks about tithes and offerings? So like the tithe is a starting point. But that's why like we do our tithe and we do our missions giving is over and above that. And if so it's okay. Like just start somewhere. Try it. You can hear this missionary stories. I remember talking to Brother Evans, and when he was younger, he said he started out giving to missions 25 or 20 or 50 cents a week or a month, I think it was. That's something. You say 50 cents a month doesn't amount to much. No, but it's 50 cents more, right? Just start somewhere, and you'll begin to see, hey, God proved himself there. And by the way, that 50 cents he gave has turned into 30 some odd years, 35 plus years of giving himself and his family and investing in people's lives in another country. That all started with that. So start somewhere. Don't just, if you're giving but not tithing, can you grow your giving? If you say, I'm giving like 1%, but I'm not giving 10%, okay. 2%, like just something. You want really fun and you're ready to test God? Hey, just go all in. Try it. Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7 as we close. You can be really crazy. Bible says, every man according to his purpose in his heart, so that a man give, not grudgingly or necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. That word cheerful literally means hilarious. We would never think, you're like, oh, I'm giving. This is laugh out loud fun. But that's how it's presented to us, all right? Maybe you've been tithing for a while, but, maybe you could do more. The world might think it's ridiculous, but what if you tried it? Like, just be generous, and those type of things. The options are endless when you start getting creative with God. Pray and talk to yourself, talk to those around you with it. And now in giving, sometimes it's not just money. Sometimes we have a talent, and maybe we could use that talent to help in some way. We have time. We could use our time to help in some way. Every now and then we get some of our missionaries to say, oh, we could use some help. And I say, oh, okay, what skills do you need? And generally every one of them says, well, we need to build something. And I'm like, I'm not the one you need to come visit you. They say, why? And I'm like, if you tell me what to do, I'll do it, but don't rely on me to know what to do. right? I'll probably do better at taking it apart than putting it up. But sometimes those skills are needed. Hey, wonderful, do that. Sometimes missionaries need something designed for them, or, we all have different ways. That's all I'm trying to say is be willing to do those types of things. Right now, I challenge you this week, spend some time thinking about what God's asking you, what he wants you to do. And remember, money can either say, worship me or give me. And when you give, you are helping break the bonds of greed and materialism that say, worship me. And you become free to experience the joys of giving. And so as we begin to think about money talks, yes, let's apply some biblical principles, not just to giving, that's where we ended, but about how we earn our money, how we save our money, how we spend our money. And when we follow these biblical principles, you know what we're going to find? A life that's more enjoyable, more satisfying, and it would be amazing the difference you're able to make. If we were to say, all right, we have all these needs of our missionaries, and that need is, those needs are going to take, like what we just did on Sunday night. All right, the Yoshida family has a need of $3,100 to be able to put their van on the road that they were given. And I would say, all right, who's going to write a check for that? You'd probably all look at me and go, I don't have that kind of money hanging around, right? But what happens when we all do something and it all builds up? We can look at that and go, oh, collectively, because individually we gave, collectively we can. And I don't know about you, but I find one of the fun things I have is when I get to text missionaries and say, guess what? When I got the text, Shuto and Susanna, and tell them, hey, I've, remember I told you that we were having a meeting? Yeah. And then she said, how did it go? And I said, oh, it went well. I have some news for you. And she says, okay. I said, well, here's how it started out. We support you for $150 a month. And so we looked at things, and we're increasing that to $200 a month. And she was excited and thought that was the message. And I said, oh, yeah, there's one other thing I need to tell you. And she said, yes. I said, you know that van you need to get on the road? And she said, yeah. I'm like, how soon do you need to get that on the road? And she's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, because how would you like us to get you the $3,100 to be able to put it on the road? There's this long pause. Like this long pause. And then all of a sudden, how you can react to statements? The reaction to the statement was a little smiley face that was crying. I was like, okay, here we go. And then she's like, well, if you send it to our, where you send our support, they're sending our support on the 1st of October, so we'll get it, and that'll be fine. And then afterwards, after things set in, I get this marathon long, thank you letter. And then I got to tell Brother Evans, I'm like, yeah, since I've told them, I'll tell you what happened. And it's just fun being able to, I messaged Brother Jeremy and I said, hey, we're sending you this money. And he's like, oh, good. I'll put an order in for the signs now. And I'm like, you do that. It's coming. And I messaged the Shemishes and I said, you know what? They said that the new church plant that they started, they needed some extra funds to help out with the growth there. I said, guess what? This much money is coming. If you want to use it for that, go for it. And she said, and Mr. Shemish said to me, thank you so much. I will tell him that'll take care of most of what we need. I was like, you know what's fun? Being able to send those messages and get the responses back. And that's all part of coming together and doing more together than we could do individually. So let me just hopefully challenge you as you look at money, whether how you earn it, whether how you spend it, whether how you save it, whether how you give it. Let's try to practice some biblical principles in that. And then let's just say to God, hey, you challenged me and said, prove me. We're gonna. And we're gonna try to apply these principles, and we're gonna try to see, God, do you really honor us do you really bless us when we honor you and put you first in our lives? You know what I can test you? 100% of the time, he always will bless us. Maybe not like we're thinking, but in many different ways, right? So that's the end of this study, and we'll begin a new study next week. I'm working, finishing up, getting a study together that's one of those ones where it's all the questions, and we give it to you, and you go home and do the homework, and then we come back and we discuss it, all right? And we'll look at that next week.